you want to be consistent about your strategies. Depending on what opening move you make, it affects the second move. It affects the third move. Anyone who plays chess knows that. Donald Trump hasn't played chess. Donald Trump doesn't know how to play chess. And our allies tonight even told me in meetings that because Donald Trump kept shifting his objectives.
Who was it?
Because Donald Trump, well, I'll tell you when the president tells us who he's negotiating with.
So you don't. So
when
you're
the president
claiming
keeps
you had
moving
high-level
our
conversations with other countries tonight?
I talk to people from the region all the time.
The
Scott.
region or with the governments?
Scott, here's the point. Here's the point. The people in that region who are our allies have been very public about their frustration.
In today's video, Miles Taylor obliterates Scott Jennings on CNN's Newsnight as a heated clash erupts over Trump's handling of the Iran conflict, rising global tensions, and growing concerns from US allies. Miles Taylor calls out the inconsistent messaging and lack of a clear long-term strategy, raising serious questions about leadership and decision-making as the situation escalates, while Scott Jennings struggles to defend the administration's shifting narrative under pressure. So let's dive in and watch how Miles Taylor shuts down Scott Jennings on CNN's Newsnight.
The president has turned this thing into a video game. I'm not saying that to score political points. I mean, he literally has White House staff trying to turn this into video games and making memes and talking about working their little hearts off making memes instead of focusing on war planning. And I had dinner tonight with Gulf state representatives. I'll tell you what our allies think in the region. They think that the president shouldn't have gone to this war. They tried to convince him not to continue the buildup in the region and not to go to war because they warned the consequences could be catastrophic. Some of these are countries who, by the way, they're no fans of Iran. They wanted to see Iran weakened, but they knew what could happen would be worse. And now they see a president who doesn't know what he's doing, who's constantly moving the goalposts, whose own staff isn't even sure what he's doing. That's pretty scary to me. The president sees this as, again, a video game, not what it is, a matter of life and death that affects not just the United States, but the entirety of our world.
Scott, is that unfair? I mean, to say we're going to bomb our little hearts out? I mean,
it would be fine with me if we continue to bomb them. These are the worst people in the world. They've been at war with us for 47 years. They want nuclear weapons. By the way, the reason that they're saying there are no talks while the president is saying there are is because they lie all the time. They sent their people out in February to say, oh, we would never have long-range missiles. We have no plans. And then what do we find out this weekend? They got 4,000-kilometer range missiles that can reach most of Europe. They lie all the time. That's what the Iranians do. They're terrorists. They hate us. We're the great Satan. Israel's the little Satan. We could wipe them off the face of the earth and it would be fine with me. But if the president achieves no nuclear weapons, no ballistic missile program, and an end to the largest state sponsor of terror on the face of the earth, that'll be a good outcome. So I hope he gets it. I'm glad he's working towards a diplomatic solution. They say he might be talking to this Speaker of the Iranian parliament. I don't know how it works over there now because we killed so many of their top guys. Maybe the left hand doesn't know who the right hand's talking to.
I agree with you. The leaders of the Iranian regime, they lie. I think the problem is we don't know if our president is also telling the truth. And so it feels like there are two bad actors in this case, and I am confused. I really don't know. I want my president to be honest.
You're equating the American president to the Iranian regime?
No, that's not what I did. And
you said two bad actors.
But two bad actors don't have to be the exact same type of bad actors. One is a little bad, one is a little worse. I don't know.
For America.
I am cheering for America, but America can only win if we're honest. And I don't know if our president is being honest with us because they haven't been honest since the beginning of this war. They didn't
tell what?
About what they actually want. Now it's just nukes. Before I thought it was regime change. Are they talking to him?
They said repeatedly,
he says
terrorism,
nope. He said the Israeli government didn't tell him they were going to strike the liquid gas reserves. Then they say it is. It's just every day it's something else. So I'm allowed to be skeptical of the truth.
It's the disconnect between urgency and strategy. When allies in the Gulf, countries that have every reason to want Iran contained, are warning against escalation, that should raise eyebrows. These are governments that deal with the fallout directly: refugee flows, energy shocks, and regional instability. Historically, even limited conflicts in the Middle East have spiraled fast, pulling in neighboring states and disrupting global markets. So when concerns are brushed aside or reduced to messaging and optics, it feeds into a broader fear that long-term consequences aren't being taken seriously enough. There's also a credibility issue that can't be ignored. In past conflicts from Iraq to Afghanistan, shifting justifications and unclear objectives eroded public trust over time. When messaging keeps changing, whether it's about nuclear deterrence, regime pressure, or broader strategic goals, it creates confusion not just for the public, but for allies who rely on consistency to align their own policies. That uncertainty weakens diplomatic leverage, because partners and adversaries alike start questioning what the actual endgame is and whether commitments will hold. At the same time, acknowledging Iran's behavior doesn't mean ignoring the risks of escalation. Intelligence assessments have repeatedly shown that military pressure alone rarely eliminates long-term threats without a parallel diplomatic framework. Even hardline strategies in the past still relied on back-channel talks to prevent wider war. So the real issue isn't whether Iran is a problem, it clearly is, but whether the current approach is coherent, transparent, and grounded in a realistic path forward rather than reactive decision-making that could spiral beyond control.
Brad, go ahead.
Well, I think it's depressing that we can't get to a point where we can't all agree that Iran, without a ballistic missile program and without its ability to run a proxy network in the region and wreak havoc, that's an unequivocal good thing. There is nothing bad about that.
I'm not hearing that at this
That's
table.
not what anybody's saying.
I'm not hearing the idea that, that Iran is not a bad actor at this table so far. Now, one thing I am hearing, and Brad, weigh in on this, and this was a question that I put to Chris Van Hollen. The Wall Street Journal editor-at-large, Gerard Baker, said this today. The unsettling reality is that with this president, Americans in wartime are in the unprecedented position of having to suspect that the enemy's version of events is more likely to be true than our own. We have become Baghdad Bob.
Of course, no one's admitting they're talking to the President of the United States, because that'd be a good way to be hung by a crane tomorrow if you're a person in the Iranian government. The Iranian government is not just a bad actor. They terrorize and murder their own citizens, much less anybody who might cut a deal with the United States. So I think we ought to trust the American president about what America's interests are.
But hasn't the president been inconsistent? Do you feel like there's been a straight line from the first strike to right now? And if you say it with a straight face.
I wish he would do less color commentary and less play-by-play. Instead of talking 6 times a day to the press on this, I wish he'd talk once a week.
And then probably why you want him to talk less than 6 times to the press is because when he talks, he doesn't say the same thing every time.
I think,
which can lead some people to think he's not telling the truth.
He's offering too many different objectives, and I think that less access would help that.
But the objectives are all worthy. You don't want Iran to continue to be a state sponsor of terror. You don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, especially now that we know they have missiles that can land all over Europe and soon, who knows where else. You don't want them to have an aggressive navy, which they have had for years. These have been consistent objectives, and as Brad said, if you achieve these things out of this, whatever the regime or something else looks like at the end, that is a good thing. They have been at war with us and all of Western civilization for 47 years. We are way overdue for this. They need to be dealt with, and he finally had the guts to do it. So at the end of this, if we achieve those things I just laid out, you would agree that would be, the world would be a better place, yes?
I've got to agree with Scott, your point about the objectives. You and I both agree. Iranian regime, bad regime, dangerous regime,
Everyone
killed Americans, terrible regime. The reason you want to be consistent about your strategy is depending on what opening move you make, it affects the second move. It affects the third move. Anyone who plays chess knows that. Donald Trump hasn't played chess. Donald Trump doesn't know how to play chess. And our allies tonight even told me in meetings that because Donald Trump keeps shifting his objectives.
Who was it?
Because Donald Trump, well, I'll tell you when the president tells us who he's negotiating with.
So you don't, so
when
so
the
you're
president
claiming
keeps
you had
moving
high-level
our objectives,
conversations with other countries tonight?
I'd talk to people from the region all the time,
The
Scott.
region or with the governments?
Scott, here's the point. Here's the point. The people in that region who are our allies have been very public about their frustration with the president's shifting objectives. And I'll tell you why. Because when you say you're going to go in and undertake regime change and a decapitation strike, you encourage your ally to throw it all out there. Donald Trump, if he'd approached this war differently, would not have instigated Iran to go attack our closest allies in the region, which they have done against civilian sites, against economic sites, that they would not likely have otherwise done if we had said, this is just about the ballistic missiles. This is just about the nuclear program. Do you remember when they struck the nuclear sites before?
You're saying,
we didn't see LNG facilities struck in the wake of that.
What really stands out here isn't disagreement over Iran being a threat. Everyone already knows that. The real issue is how you handle that threat without making things worse. History shows that when objectives keep shifting mid-conflict, it creates instability not just on the battlefield, but across alliances. You can look back at past US interventions where unclear goals led to prolonged conflicts and unintended consequences. When strategy feels reactive instead of planned, it increases the risk of escalation, especially in a region as sensitive as the Middle East, where one move can trigger multiple responses. There's also the question of credibility, and that matters more than people think. In modern warfare, consistency in messaging is part of the strategy itself. Allies depend on it to coordinate actions, and adversaries test it for weaknesses. When messaging changes frequently, it doesn't just confuse the public, it signals uncertainty. That can embolden opposing forces to push boundaries because they're not sure where the real red lines are. Even intelligence communities have warned that mixed signals during conflicts can lead to miscalculations, which is often how larger wars unintentionally begin. And while eliminating threats like nuclear weapons or proxy networks sounds straightforward, it's rarely that simple in practice. Military pressure alone hasn't historically dismantled deeply rooted systems without long-term diplomatic and economic strategies backing it up. In fact, aggressive openings without a clearly defined endgame can provoke broader retaliation, including attacks on civilian or economic targets. So the concern here isn't about denying the danger, it's about whether the approach is disciplined, consistent, and actually reduces risk instead of creating a bigger, more unpredictable conflict.
Because they didn't know we were there. We were gone before they ever knew we were there. So you're saying if we had sent out...
But we also annihilated it, right?
You're saying if we had sent out the correct press release, the Iranians wouldn't have acted erratically?
No, I'm saying if the President of the United States understood why he was there, we'd be able to achieve our objectives better.
Get rid of the nukes, get rid of the missiles, get rid of the terrorism.
But the reality is,
from the beginning.
The American people aren't with your talking points. They are highly skeptical. They don't like the tactics. I think there is a way you can get to an outcome, but there are many pathways to this solution. And I don't know if the American people are with the president. And one reason why I don't think they're with the president is because it doesn't feel like he is being honest. I'll ask you the same question I asked Brad. From the time we did the strikes a couple weeks ago to today, do you feel like we've gotten the same story?
Yes, I feel like the objectives have been
Then
clear to me.
you aren't watching the news.
Because
not the
nukes,
objectives,
missiles,
the story.
terror, Navy. It's been consistent time and again. POTUS, Rubio, Hegseth,
No, Rubio said the
nukes,
reason why we did it is because they were going to strike Israel and then they would strike. I mean, you aren't watching the same news that we're all watching then if you think the story hasn't changed.
I come to the same office you do. I watch plenty of news.
But they literally said, we're not going after nuclear sites. Like, just that one alone. Let's just hone in on that one. That's not true. What you just said wasn't true.
For the entirety of Donald Trump's adult life, he has said,
we're talking about
Iran
this war
will
right
never have a nuclear weapon on my watch.
But we're talking about this war right now. The nuke sites have not been a target in this war.
Here's where it all boils down to. This president had the guts to do something that was very difficult to take out an avowed enemy of the United States. When we saw President Obama do that with Syria, he backed away from his red line. His party didn't support him. The president's party has supported him. They will continue to support him as long as he's achieving worthy objectives in Iran and as long as this is quick. Which he still indicates
elected officials have supported him. Many people in your party are not supporting him.
CNN's own polling shows it's 99%.
You're not looking at the correct
92% of Americans want this war to end as soon as humanly possible.
Agreed.
CBS News
I do
3
too.
days ago.
Everyone does.
We all want
want
this war to end
our
as
objectives
soon as
met.
humanly possible.
Everybody agrees
I
on
want
that.
our objectives met too. I want it done in a thoughtful way. This president did not approach this in a thoughtful way. He did not game it out.
How much longer should we wait? Another 47 years?
Scott, he didn't even claim he didn't think the Strait of Hormuz would be closed. You know where I saw that done? My grad school international relations class. We gamed that out, and that's what happened.
Well, first of all, the CNN reporting is a little bit more nuanced than what you posit, which is there is a difference between what we're prepared to do in terms of the war plans, which you are absolutely correct, and what officials thought, how far that they thought they would be willing to go. And this is playing into a number of other things, including questions about the Israelis seem to think that the Iranian people would go farther than they actually have been willing to go here. But Scott, I want to ask you this question as we wrap up here. Is it right or wrong? Should the United States of America be striking civilian energy infrastructure the way that Vladimir Putin has struck civilian power plants in Ukraine? Because that is what we are talking about here. That is something that the president put on the table. Right? Wrong? Is that an American value?
We have to strike any targets necessary to achieve the objectives.
Including civilian targets that are typically proscribed.
The president putting on pause while we're apparently having conversations with somebody shows a real resistance to wanting or needing to do that. He knows whatever comes next, the country of Iran, you want it to rejoin Western civilization at some point. You don't want to have to decimate this. So I think his instinct is, Casey, what is under your question, which is you don't want to have to do that. And if you can get to a solution without having to do that, but at the same time, Iran is firing missiles intermittently into its allies or other countries in the region and saying, we're just going to strike all kinds of targets. So if you don't leave it on the table.
Look, Scott, this would not be the first American enemy that doesn't want to play by the rules of war that we set, but we set those rules of war to protect ourselves and to set an example for the world. That's why I'm asking the question.
What really jumps out here is how much this comes down to trust and consistency, not just raw military strength. When public messaging shifts even slightly, it creates doubt, and that doubt matters in wartime. Recent polling has shown that while Americans may support limiting Iran's capabilities, a strong majority also want clear justification and a defined endgame before backing prolonged action. That gap between supporting an objective and trusting the execution is where skepticism grows, and it's exactly why mixed signals from leadership can become a bigger issue than the conflict itself. There's also a broader strategic concern that goes beyond just Iran. When military action expands to include economic or civilian-linked infrastructure, it starts to blur lines that the US has historically tried to uphold. International law and long-standing defense doctrines emphasize minimizing civilian impact, not just for ethical reasons, but because it helps maintain global legitimacy. Once those lines start to shift, it becomes harder to criticize other countries for doing the same thing. That's not just theoretical, it directly affects alliances, especially in regions where partners are already cautious about escalation. And then there's the regional reality. The Strait of Hormuz alone handles a significant portion of the world's oil supply, and even the threat of disruption can spike global prices and destabilize economies. Analysts have warned for years that miscalculations in that area could trigger wider consequences far beyond the battlefield. So the issue isn't whether Iran poses a threat, it clearly does, but whether the current approach is disciplined enough to avoid turning a contained conflict into something much bigger and far harder to control. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.